Hello there. Welcome back to Data Vinci's YouTube channel. So in today's video, we are going to be talking about attribution issues in GA4. So in this video, we are going to be covering first and foremost the definition of an attribution issue for this presentation, since an attribution issue is a very broad term and it could encompass a lot of other things. Secondly, we'll move on to understand how you can spot those attribution issues in GA4. Once you spot them, we'll understand the prominent reasons for these issues to occur in GA4 and what are some of the solves that you can implement to reduce them or either eliminate these issues. Finally, we'll conclude with our learnings of this presentation. But before we begin, let's understand how will this benefit your business. So by solving the attribution issues, you would essentially be improving your return on investment, or you would be getting a truer picture of your ROAS. And once you do that, you would be able to optimize your marketing spend. For instance, if your budget for paid social and paid search is 50-50, you could increase the budget for paid search by 20% or something like that, depending on the actual returns that you're making. And once you do that, you're actually enabling data-driven decision making, which in fact is the best sort of decision making that you can enable for your business. So if this interests you, stay tuned for understanding the whole presentation. Definition of an attribution issue. So for our presentation, we will define an attribution issue as follows. If you cannot confidently identify which channel or which campaign is making the biggest impact on your business, then you can say that you have an attribution issue. For instance, in this figure, you can see that there are 3 conversion paths that the group of users take to reach towards your goal. And from these 3, if you're not able to understand which of these 3 paths is the most taken, which of these 3 paths is the most profitable for you, then you can say that you have an attribution issue. Moving on to how to spot an attribution issue. So spotting an attribution issue is somewhat similar to how a doctor diagnoses a patient. They first check for symptoms, and after checking the symptoms, they prescribe the patient to some of the tests, right? So what are some of the symptoms that you should look out for? So you should be looking out for an unusually high amount of traffic coming from unassigned or direct channel or any of the organic channels as well. For instance, if you're using just paid search or paid social for directing traffic towards your pages, but you're not seeing those channels come up in GA4, it could be because of an attribution issue. The second symptom that you should be looking out for is the metrics tally. So in GA4, if you see 10 conversions in the last 7 days for Facebook, but in Facebook you see that there are 20 conversions for the last 7 days, then you can say that you might have an attribution issue, since the match rate between GA4 and Facebook is about 50%. So once you've seen the symptoms, what can you do next? You can perform some attribution tests. So attribution tests are not very hard. We'll just look at some of the ways of how you can do attribution tests and verify your attribution in GA4. Let's jump into Tag Assistant. Okay, so let's see how you can quickly conduct some attribution tests and verify your tracking. So let's jump into Tag Manager and let's go into the preview mode. In the preview mode, you can enter your website link and let's add some UTM parameters. Let's say the UTM source is test1 and the UTM medium is test medium, something like that. You can even add the campaign name, the term, the content, anything else, or even a query parameter, a custom query parameter that you would like to get appended. This should be enough for now, and you can click on connect and it should take you to your website. Once you're on your website, let's conduct one test purchase to see whether the test purchase is firing correctly or not. let's buy this product. Enter my details. This is just a dummy website, so any of the details work. Okay, so the purchase is complete. Let's see the tags that are fired. So initially all the page view tags are fired 4 times and purchase fired 1 time, and along with some other tags as well. Let's see what was pushed into the data layer in the purchase event. So you can see the transaction ID, the item, and the value. The transaction ID is a very important parameter over here because you'd be checking this transaction ID the next day in GA4. Since I've already conducted a test transaction before recording this tutorial, let's dive into GA4 and how to see whether the attribution actually works or not. So within GA4, you can create an explore report, and you could include dimensions such as the session source and medium, campaign, the transaction ID, and the page reference just in case. And for the metrics, you could include just the event count or sessions. And over here, you can see that I conducted one of the attribution tests, and the source was campaign source test and campaign medium test. So those were my UTM parameters that were set, and they have been reflected correctly out here, and so has the transaction ID. So this confirms that the attribution in my GA4 property is working well. You can also conduct more attribution tests to see to replicate other phenomena such as a person coming through email. Maybe you're sending out links through the email newsletter and checking whether those links have the UTM parameters, and those UTM parameters are getting tracked in GA4 and so on. So you can check that in multiple ways. Let's assume that this particular transaction ID was attributed to something like direct or none. In that case, you would say that you might have an attribution issue. And what could be the reasons for that? We'll be looking at those reasons in the following section. Okay, so now let's discuss what are some of the prominent reasons for attribution issues in GA4. So number one prominent reason that exists in most of the cases is the missing UTM parameters or the query parameters, which is responsible for identifying the traffic source. If you're not passing UTM parameters, you'd be missing out a lot of key information through things like the UTM content, the UTM term, etc. Give us a lot of info for further analysis, and it also makes the attribution in GA4 much more easier. Secondly, the UTM parameters that you've been passing, if they are not in accordance with the channel group that you have in GA4, perhaps you're using the default channel group or you have a custom channel group, but they are not in accordance with it, then there would be an issue in the attribution because those parameters are not in line with the channel group definitions. So for instance, if you have defined the paid search as something like if the source contains Google, or if the medium contains PPC, then only consider it as paid search. But the parameters may be passed as such as a paid click or something like that, and they might not be recognized as paid search, and so on. The third reason could be that you are using measurement protocol and those hits of measurement protocol are not configured correctly. There can be multiple reasons such as a missing session ID, a random session ID, a client ID, and so on. And also remember, measurement protocol is only able to stitch the session if it is 72 hours within the 72 hours window of the session. So for instance, if a user converts on your website today, and if you have an offline conversion that is happening 7 days or 8 days from now, that conversion, if you're sending through measurement protocol, will not get attributed to the session source of that initial purchase that happened on your website. You can still use the first user and first user medium as the way to check the attribution, but the session-based attribution will not work for that. The fourth reason that could happen is the session start event is missing. So a session start event is fired by GA4 itself when the config tag fires, and this usually happens in the cases of server-side tag tracking, where we direct our calls to the server-side container, and the server-side container fires the GA4 hits, right? So there could be an issue where the event tags are firing before the config tag, and therefore most of the sessions do not have a session start event and would be categorized as unassigned or direct. A final reason that you need to consider is that GA4 does have a lot of lag in the data processing. Even the standard reports may take more than 24 hours for the data to be fully processed. So for instance, if you're seeing for yesterday, there are 100 sessions from unassigned. If you see 2 days from now, that number can reduce. It could be reallocated to paid search or anywhere else. So those are the prominent reasons for attribution issues in GA4. Okay, so what can you do to solve these attribution issues in GA4? Let's look at some of the points. So the number one most important thing that you need to start doing is you need to start adding UTM parameters to all of your ad campaigns, all of your email campaigns, and display ads, and so on. By any way that you're sending traffic towards your website, you would like to identify the source of that traffic, right? So you need to start tagging each of your traffic sources. Secondly, if you're using the GA4 tag in a customized way, perhaps by overriding the session ID or such, maybe passing a random value instead of what is passed by GA4 by default, this would result in an increase in the unassigned or the direct hits, because session ID itself is used by GA4 to connect the sessions or to stitch those sessions. And if those session ID is different than what it was in the beginning, then that two sessions, it would be considered as two sessions, which is not an ideal scenario, right? Third, if you're using measurement protocol for any of the events that are happening after the 72-hour limit of a session, then you need to be prepared that this would definitely inflate the unassigned or the direct count in your traffic acquisition reports. Fourth, this is one of the key things about audiences is that you are now able to create triggers or trigger events based on audiences. So whenever somebody enters this audience, an event is triggered. Although this is a useful feature, we would avoid using this feature because we've seen that this has led to an increase in the unassigned traffic in GA4. And the last and the most important point of solving attribution issues, and perhaps the most easiest one, you can contact DataVinci for a free GA4 audit to solve your attribution issues, or at least identify them and perhaps give you a way to how you can solve them. So if you're interested in that, there'll be a link in the description. Just click on that and submit your GA4 property. So let's summarize what we've learned today. So attribution issue. How can you say whether you have an attribution issue? So if you have an attribution issue, you cannot say for sure which particular channel brings you the most conversion and which particular channel is the most efficient for you. And this particular data is not available in GA4 for you. So if you're facing such a problem, then yes, you might be facing an attribution issue. How can you spot attribution issues in GA4? You can compare GA4 with the respective platform metrics. You can compare their match rates. You can also check for any spikes in in channels such as the unassigned or the direct channel, or you can conduct an attribution test. Moving on, we've discussed some of the main reasons for errors in attribution in GA4, such as missing UTM parameters not in accordance with the channel group, or the measurement protocol hits are not configured correctly, perhaps the session start event is missing, or the last case scenario where you'd be hoping GA4 has not finished processing data. So you'd check again after 2-3 days, and yeah, GA4 has correctly attributed your data. That would be a sigh of relief, but in most cases that does not happen. Finally, if you want to solve all of your attribution worries, get in touch with DaVinci and we'll help you out. So that was it for this particular video. Thank you, and may the force be with you.